Welcome to The Big Picture, a show that takes a deep dive into the political landscape of not only America, but right here in our own backyard of Illinois.
It's showtime, folks.
The Big Picture is on WCPT 820. And now, here's your host, Edwin Eisendrath.
Well, hello, everybody. Another beautiful day here in the upper Midwest, and another grim week for us all over the country. It's not like grim weeks are new. At what point shall we expect the approach of danger? That was a question somebody asked a while back. And he went on to say, but by what means shall we fortify against it? Shall we expect some transatlantic military giant to step the ocean and crush us at a blow? Never. All the armies of Europe, Asia, and Africa combined, with all the treasure of earth, our own accepted, in their military chest, with a Bonaparte for a commander, could not by force take a drink from the Ohio or make a track on the Blue Ridge in a trial of 1,000 years. At what point, then, is the approach of danger to be expected? I answer, if it ever reach us, it must spring from amongst us. It cannot come from abroad. If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher. As a nation of free men, we must live through all time or die by suicide. That was Abraham Lincoln as a young man, 24 years before the first shot at Fort Sumter plunged us in the war. And here we are, 160 years after that terrible war ended, and danger approaches again. But we have no Lincoln to occupy the White House. Instead, the chief insurrectionist himself holds the office. Today, not our beloved nation alone, but truth itself will either live forever or die by our collective suicide. And so we have last week's news. Donald Trump told us that he'd ordered two nuclear submarines to reposition in response to threats of nuclear war from Russia. Let me say that again. Two nuclear submarines ordered via tweet by Donald Trump to reposition because of a nuclear threat from Russia. That happened. And you know what? Nobody cared. Think about that. Boy, it was different. Not that long ago, not Civil War long ago, just 2017 in Trump's first term. But we didn't know the man yet. But let's look at that summer because it tells us a lot about where we are this summer. Back then, Trump was just finishing his first 6 months in office. He told us they were the best 6 months any president ever had. Of course, that was a lie. His attorney general, Jeff Sessions, had recused himself about the Russia investigation and appointed Robert Mueller to investigate. Trump was alternatively trying to change the subject or to normalize news about Don Jr.'s meetings with Russian officials to get dirt on Hillary Clinton. And on July 18th of that year, news broke that Trump and Putin held a second undisclosed private conversation. Think about that. An attorney general who cared enough about the rule of law and the appearance of bias that he would recuse rather than put his thumb on the scales of justice for the boss. And a president deeply entwined with Russia and meeting in secret with Putin. Wow. Back then, Americans weren't ready to embrace Putin. We weren't ready to let a president weaponize the Justice Department. Seems different now, right? Meanwhile, Trump's effort back then to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act had failed. His much-promised infrastructure bill didn't materialize. The White House was in disarray. His spokesman, Sean Spicer, resigned. So did his chief of staff, Reince Priebus. Republicans began to distance themselves from Trump. They passed a Russian sanctions bill over his objection. They told him not to fire the attorney general. By the way, In July of 2017, this has nothing to do with what I'm telling you, but it's fun. That same year, a Trump sketch of Manhattan skyline sold at auction for $29,000. As I say, it's not relevant to my point right now, but didn't Trump just tell us he never made a sketch of anything? What a liar. Anyway, back in 2017, a few days later, the Boy Scouts had to apologize for letting Trump turn their jamboree into a hate fest. Then Mueller went after White House documents on General Flynn. Again, back then, this was really troubling for Trump because Americans weren't ready to deny reality, just to discredit stories that Trump didn't like, at least not most Americans. Throughout this time, Trump had been stoking white nationalist rage with daily gifts, right? Muslim bans, ICE raids, claims of voter fraud tied to non-white voters, kind words for police brutality, his first efforts to end affirmative action in colleges, and the angrier and more resentful he made this minority of white Americans, the more they supported him. And with presidential rhetoric filling their sails, more than 200 white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and pro-Confederate thugs brought their torches and their hate to the University of Virginia. And they shouted, "Jews will not replace us," and "blood and soil." James Alex Fields, one of the foot soldiers in this hateful movement, drove his car into peaceful counter-protesters. He killed a woman named Heather Heyer. He wounded at least 18 others. Trump said there were very good people on both sides. Wow. Back in 2017, America was not ready to abandon its dream of a democracy where we are all created equal. We were not ready to hate each other. We were not ready to follow blindly the whims of a dictator. So Trump's popularity plummeted. His approval rating went down, to 39%. It was at 44% just a week earlier, plummeting. Do you remember what happened next? I do, because it scared me. Trump began threatening to attack North Korea with nuclear weapons. He spoke about it at the United Nations. He ratcheted up tension, promising fire and fury, saying he would totally destroy North Korea. That dangerous rhetoric continued for months. And then Trump and North Korea's dictator, Kim Jong-un, met at the Winter Olympics. Then Trump visited North Korea. Then they exchanged what Trump calls love letters. For Trump, the crisis of the summer had passed. The threat of nuclear war brought him time to bring Republicans to heel, to put Charlottesville behind him. Trump survived. And of course, North Korea got their atomic bombs and their ballistic missiles. Trump's threats didn't stop North Korea. They were never meant to. They were a distraction for us, a distraction because he was in trouble in his first 6 months. Donald Trump told us this week that he ordered 2 nuclear submarines to reposition in response to Russian nuclear threats. Are you kidding me? Here we go again, but this time we're not distracted. I mean, it's dangerous, it's reckless, but we know better, right? And we need to be ready because Donald Trump needs to find something to get our attention when he's in trouble. And I need to ask this, what can this monster do? Where can he take us when threats of nuclear war aren't enough? We're about to find out. My guess, he will continue to militarize our politics, politicize our military, and we will see troops in our streets before the midterms. You don't have to be Abe Lincoln to see this coming. We have a great show. You take a break. You can hear I need some water. But when we come back, I really have a superb show for you today. And we're going to start right in when we get back with Sam Bagnestos, who's back. Stay tuned.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody. I am thrilled that Sam Bagnestos is back. He is a law professor at the University of Michigan Law School. He served as general counsel to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services during the Biden administration. So he's been paying attention to what this administration is doing to our health, to the institutions that protect us, to the programs that Congress authorized for our benefit. He was also, I think, and Sam, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, general counsel at OMB at some point. So I guess it, more about the occult art that people in Washington speak of in hushed tones, mostly because they don't understand it. Things like budgets, appropriations, no-fuzz, impoundment, stuff like that. Sam, welcome back.
Thanks. Really great to be here.
Am I right? You were at OMB too, isn't that right?
That's right. I was general counsel at OMB, and then I was general counsel at HHS.
Wow. Well, that gave you a pretty good seat to get to know our government.
Yeah, I mean, as we're learning from the current Trump administration, OMB is really the nerve center of the federal executive branch, and you get to see everything that happens. And if you have someone who really wants to aggressively use power, that's the place to put them. And we're seeing Russ Vought really aggressively shut down programs that have a lot of support, but that he and Donald Trump don't like. And, that's a great threat that we're experiencing right now.
We sure are. Yesterday, Donald Trump fired the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics because she did her job. Today, right-wing media is slandering her in every possible way. Well, Sam, what defense does Truth have anymore? Can she go to court and sue the liars who are claiming, she made up data to damage Donald Trump?
We are increasingly seeing defamation lawsuits being brought in contexts like this. I mean, this is something that Donald Trump himself was a real avatar of and has been an avatar of, bringing lawsuits against people who express disagreement with him. I actually think that's a terrible development for free speech in this country.
I do too.
We had developed this idea that we wanted to protect people's ability to criticize those in power. And, in the Times versus Sullivan case back in the 60s, the Supreme Court said the First Amendment limited defamation suits. It looks like, it's certainly true that Trump would like to get rid of that decision. And, there does seem to be a movement within the judiciary. Several Supreme Court justices and lower court judges have indicated they want to do that. So I don't think it's a great development. On the other hand, I think if it does happen, it really has to work both ways. It can't be that you can slander a public servant just for doing her job. Completely lie about what she did and not face any recourse, but that people who say even truthful bad things about the president are on the hook for lawsuits. So she may well. But I think, the bigger picture here, and what makes me so incredibly upset about what happened yesterday is that you saw the president do something we all expected he would do when the employment numbers turned bad. He would blame the people who gave him those numbers and would fire them and would make up lies about what they were doing and how they were cooking the books. Okay, we fully expected that. I think everybody who is a serious person, Democrat or Republican, knows how important it is that our official statistics have integrity, and knows that he is full of it in saying that there was a problem with these statistics. This is something that's important for the government to work, for the government to be able to serve people, but it's also important for business in the markets, which you think that Republicans would care about, and that there are Republicans in the House and the Senate who have been elected who do care about that. And yet, have they attacked the president for doing this? Have they criticized the president for doing this? Have they done anything, even the sort of furrowed brow that we see sometimes has not been evident. Instead, they're just falling in line. And I think that's a sign of how far gone we are, because this is something, it doesn't serve Republican policy interests. It just serves Donald Trump. And it really deeply undermines basic governing institutions that people left and right rely on, and yet not a peep out of the Republicans about that. Instead, many of them are piling on, as you say, lying about this really, really committed public servant.
Well, I think, Sam, this is not a left and right moment. So things may not serve the left or the right, namely not having data. But that's not the fight we're in. We're in a fight where the Republican Party has become Donald Trump's one-party rule. We're going to cement our autocracy, and everybody else is on the other side. And that's not left-right. That's democracy versus autocracy. And one of them is wherever it plants its flag lies. That's what they have to do. I mean, I guess, in the time we're in, we're going to have to adopt some of the things the right has pushed upon us. Libel litigation, for example. It's terrible. I agree with you. We have to do it. Gerrymandering, since Texas is doing it, I think we have to do it. It should be illegal, but the Supreme Court doesn't believe that. PAC money, we got to take it. But there are lines we can't cross even in this war, because then the war is not worth fighting, and blatant lying, making up fake statistics. That's a bridge, I think, always going to be too far if we want to fight for our democracy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, we have to stand for truth and believe in truth. And that's not a matter of unilateral disarmament. That's a matter of just the things that we need to have in a government, and honestly, in the virtue of the public and the virtue of the people who govern. I go back a lot. I've been thinking a lot recently about Madison, who I have a lot of problems with in many respects, but thinking about the way Madison thought about the separation of powers in our government and how it's totally broken down. And one of the things that he failed to anticipate, I mean, he recognized that this only works if we have a degree of Republican virtue, small r Republican virtue, among the people who govern. And, we've just lost that to a large extent. We need to rebuild that. But I agree. What we have to do is be very aggressive with the tools we have to legitimately fight to take this government back for democracy. But, things we don't compromise on. We don't compromise on democracy. We don't compromise on basic rights. We don't compromise on truth. And then we need, God willing, when a movement of people rises up and democratically takes back the reins of this government, we need to really think about how do we remake the government, not just go back to where things were on January 19th, but, what are the institutions we need to build? I think what we're seeing right now is this whole unitary executive theory, which has been ascendant for decades and has, really taken over thanks to Donald Trump, but also thanks to John Roberts and the Supreme Court. We saw yesterday exactly why that is so illegitimate, because, democracy is not you vote for one guy, and then that means that what that one guy does.
Yeah, he's king for 4 years. Yeah, no.
Yeah, right. Any whim that he has, should Trump laws that were passed through the constitutional process, should Trump institutions that were created democratically, should Trump the longer-term interest of the people as they have expressed time and time again in laws enacted democratically. But the unitary executive theory tends to this sort of autocratic, personalist kind of approach. Congress said, look, we need to insulate certain kinds of positions from the president being able to just remove the occupants of those positions for no reason. And the Supreme Court has increasingly said, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. You can't do that. Instead, the president gets to decide he's the one who was elected. Well, we see yesterday, this is going to be devastating. He didn't like the numbers, so he fired the person who gave him the numbers. Is anybody going to trust the numbers again? How are people going to make investment decisions based on that? In other countries, when we've had exactly the same thing happen, the official statistics gatherers have provided statistics that were true but inconvenient for the regime in power and been fired. The result has been that the economies have tanked in those countries because nobody trusts the statistics. Of course, no, but people are not stupid. People can see what's going on. Even in the Biden administration, where I was, very proud to serve, we didn't cook any of the books, but, President Biden and Vice President Harris kept telling people, look at the statistics. The economy is doing well. And people were saying, those statistics are not consistent with my experience. Well, how much more so when the statistics are totally made up, or you have no reason to believe they're not made up?
Yeah. Well, there was a lot in this open here that we should unpack for the next half hour.
Yeah.
Starting with, you went back to Madison, and I think I've gone back to Madison too. Like you, I have some problems, but I have growing respect for how carefully he tried to think about these questions of power. And I look at the crop of people who are thinking of running for Congress and running for the United States Senate, and when they run on the kinds of issues that were always that in my lifetime mattered. I'm going to bring back cash for my state. I'm going to fight for women's rights. I'm going to fight for civil rights, whatever it is. I'm going to fight for more or less government regulation. I say to myself, okay, great, but we're in a different era. We do have to elect a few people who, like Madison, are laser focused on how our government works, how power is managed in our country in a way that provides people with the most freedom. And I don't yet see a crop of candidates who are really thinking about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I think that, you've held elected office. I ran for elected office.
Yep.
What the folks who run campaigns will tell you about running for office, right? They have a very, particularly on the Democratic side, they have a very specific set of very poll-tested messages that they push. And, unfortunately, I think we're seeing a lot of the sort of risk aversion among Democratic candidates focusing on those messages, which I just don't think actually resonate with people. Maybe in an issue poll, which is a very artificial kind of thing, in an issue poll, people will say, yes, aha, prescription drug costs. That's the most important thing to me. And so you have people running around talking about prescription drug costs. Joe Biden did the most of any president ever to lower prescription drug costs. The Inflation Reduction Act is a major reduction in prescription drug costs, a $2,000 cap on prescription drug costs for people on Medicare. This is huge. My mom, who's on medication that before the cap, she had to really work hard to pay for because it costs thousands and thousands of dollars a year, and a lot of people, she was lucky that she could actually scrape to do that. So many more people are going to be able to afford drugs since Biden, but did that move the needle in the election last year? Probably not, because it's not what people are focused on when they walk in the voting booth. And it's not at the moment the most important issue, because all these great laws we pass mean nothing if you can elect someone who can just tear it all down on a whim. And that's what we have now. We need people who care about the institutions of democracy, who care about rebuilding the separation of powers, because that really serves democratic interests.
Yeah, and one of the things that Madison didn't anticipate was the rise of political parties. And this notion, particularly on the Republican side, where party unity, it matters more than what the voters in your district want, matters more than anything. It's like picking people don't even run in their districts in the UK, right? They're like, oh, I live here, but I'm going to run for that district because it's about party. And the Republicans, with their control in state governments and in Congress, and I'm going to call the Supreme Court partisan, and the White House, they act in party interest. And that, I think, Madison couldn't contemplate, because that means that they're not accountable to their voters. They're accountable to the people who make the maps. They're accountable to the people who raise the money.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. We do have a party system now. That was not something that Madison anticipated when, the Constitution was being formed. I mean, what's interesting is, obviously Madison was very important
That's
party system.
That's true.
But nonetheless, there is this idea. One of the most widely cited articles by law professors in the last several decades is a piece by Rick Pildes and Darrell Levinson, who are terrific law professors and scholars, called "Separation of Parties, Not Powers." And the title gives you the sense of what it's about. That we have a system that is built assuming, as Madison said, that ambition will check ambition, that the legislative branch is going to be very protective of its prerogatives against the executive, but it's just not true anymore in our party system. And part of that is, as you were suggesting, you said it's about who raises the money. Part of that is just the massive amount of cash that drives our system right now, and how unregulated it is. And so it is really the case that people who are trying to get elected for office are not going to be focused on what the general public cares about. They're not going to be focused on, what political scientists would say is the median voter, what the median voter cares about, the people in the middle of the electorate. They're going to be focused on what's going to enable them to raise money. And then in a world where we have so much gerrymandering, which I think really is a scourge, and the Supreme Court should have done something about it. In that kind of world, they're going to worry much more about whether they can win a primary election than whether they can win a general election. The appeal is going to be to the extremes in the party or the most active people within their party, as opposed to the public good. And they're going to have absolutely no loyalty to their institution. It used to be like the Senate was the last place, the last bastion here. Senators all sort of defended the Senate. Well, we've seen even in 7 months, less than 7 months of this administration, we've seen that really erode.
Okay, so you talked about the unitary executive, this funnel of unregulated dark money, gerrymandering, which I think the Supreme Court did something about. They made it legal. But that all brings us to the Supreme Court, and I don't understand them. And it's impossible for non-lawyers like me to keep track of the legal trickery on offer by this court. And there were a couple of cases that I want better to understand. And I think you can help me. One was, there was a story that was reported as if it were about abortion and about Planned Parenthood, but it's a sneaky court, and I suspect that it was something else. This Planned Parenthood ruling a few months ago that said they couldn't be eligible to participate in Medicaid, take any of that money. I think that's bigger than just about, abortion is a big question. Medicaid is a big question, but I think it opens other doors, doesn't it?
Yeah, so there are actually, two things that recently happened with Planned Parenthood and Medicaid. One was in the Supreme Court and one was in the president's OBBBA, One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Yes, that's the title. But what the Supreme Court did was it heard this case from South Carolina, where South Carolina had decided that they were going to exclude Planned Parenthood from their Medicaid program. Now, to be clear, Planned Parenthood was not using Medicaid funds to perform abortions since the Hyde Amendment was adopted in the 70s. Medicaid funds cannot be used for abortion except in very, very, very narrow cases. And there's no indication that Planned Parenthood was using Medicaid funds for abortions in violation of the Hyde Amendment. What people were getting Medicaid funds to use at Planned Parenthood was, things like normal prenatal care, OBGYN services, that sort of thing. And there are a lot of reasons why people get just their women's health care from Planned Parenthood. Well, in order to punish Planned Parenthood, South Carolina excluded them from the program, said, if you're a Medicaid beneficiary, you want to go to Planned Parenthood for your OBGYN services, you're out of luck. And there's a provision in the Medicaid Act adopted by Congress that says that any qualified provider in the state is eligible to receive Medicaid dollars to serve Medicaid-eligible people. People call this the freedom of choice provision. The idea is, you
pick your doctor.
You pick your doctor, right? Medicaid is insurance. It's giving people health insurance. It's not telling them what doctor to go to. And so, an individual in South Carolina, as well as Planned Parenthood in South Carolina, sued the state. And one of the important things to note is that the Supreme Court did not decide that South Carolina was complying with the freedom of choice provision in the law. Instead, what they said was, well, whether they're complying or not, Planned Parenthood and the patient who's injured can't sue for it because Congress didn't give them a right to sue. Now, Congress passed a law that said that anytime a state deprives someone of a right created by the Constitution or laws, including statutes, they should be able to sue the state actor who has violated their right. And the Supreme Court said, yeah, well, not really this one, though. This is a provision that may create a benefit, but it doesn't create a right. 6-3 decision, very, very strong dissent by Ketanji Brown Jackson, who has become, such a strong justice so quickly. But the basic idea there was, we're going to make it a whole lot harder for people who are injured by violations of federal law to sue the states that violate their rights under federal law. And yes, the opinion, certainly it's about Planned Parenthood, but it goes much farther. It has implications for other instances when states don't give people the care or the insurance they're entitled to under Medicaid laws. We've unfortunately seen, I've worked on a number of these cases in my career, we've seen too many times when, states aren't giving people the services that they're entitled to under Medicaid and people have to sue. And this is a decision that's going to make it really, really hard for them to sue and certainly suggests that the court's going to completely shut that door when it gets the chance. So, yes, it's a huge deal. It happens to have occurred in the context of Planned Parenthood, but it's a much bigger deal than that.
Yeah, so that's what I thought. So what they did was say to ordinary Americans, you know what, the law may say you're protected, but if a state decides to violate that law, you're out of luck. Nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, basically you can file a complaint with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services in D.C. They have way too much to do. They're not going to be able to do anything effective about that. Yeah. You can file a complaint with the state that is violating your rights. We'll see how that goes. They said, well, maybe once the state considers the complaint, if the state rejects the complaint, you can go to state court to get review of that. And maybe once you've gone through all the layers of state court, you could ask the Supreme Court to review that. Well, the Supreme Court hears 60 cases a year. Do you think they're going to hear that case? No. So really, they're saying you're out of luck.
This is a theme with the Supreme Court. Donald Trump may be breaking the law, but there's nothing we can do about it. We're going to find a technical thing that says, yeah, you may be breaking. We're not going to opine on whether or not he can deny birthright citizenship to Americans. We don't know about that yet, but there's nothing we can do about it right now. So we can go ahead and set those rules. It's such a stunning abdication for me of their job, even. And I just don't recall anything like it ever in my life.
Yeah, and I think I think that this is a court that is working overtime to allow Donald Trump to do the things that he wants to do. You see lower federal courts around the country who are looking at the facts, who are looking at the evidence, who are considering the law and are saying, we need to issue an order to at least hit pause on these massive changes that Trump is making, because they sure seem to violate the law to us. You know, when Congress passes laws saying you need to have NIH grant programs and you know, Donald Trump and Elon Musk and Doge and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. say, actually, we're not going to spend that money. You know, that is a violation of the basic constitutional power of the purse in Congress. And it's a violation of the president's responsibility under Article 2 of the Constitution. Article 2 of the Constitution says the president shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed. And when the president says, yeah, but I don't like the law that was passed by Congress, you know, and signed by my predecessor, so I'm not going to follow it, that's a violation of a clear provision of the Constitution. And lower courts are saying, we're going to hit pause on this to make sure that you have authority to do the thing, because it sure doesn't look to me like you do. And the Supreme Court jumps in and says, no, we're going to issue a stay. President, do what you want.
Right, without even giving us the reasons or signing their name to it.
Without even giving us the reasons or signing their names to it. Exactly. And then, you know, to add insult to injury, when they grant a stay of one order without giving the reasons, then there's another order in another case that a district judge issues that is plausibly different than the case they issued the stay in. The case goes up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says, we're granting a stay. And by the way, district court, didn't you hear what we said the last time? You know, and the answer is, what did you say? I mean, it was an inarticulate
yes, exactly
belch.
Right.
It was a slap. I mean, it was not an opinion with a rationale and with an explanation of what exactly they were holding. But, you know, one thing that's clear is this Supreme Court wants to let the president do what he wants in a very large set of cases.
Yeah,
you know,
let me ask you about another case that helps me understand this. This was one where it sure looked like the court upheld a provision of the Affordable Care Act. But, you know, again, I'm not a lawyer, but on closer inspection, I think he was setting a precedent for a longer-term game of overturning the whole thing. This was the case of Kennedy versus Braidwood Management.
Yeah, I mean, so that is, I think, a very important case for understanding what's going on. Yeah, that, you know, the top line that you read about this is Supreme Court upholds the Affordable Care Act, and, you know, Supreme Court upholds the preventive service mandates of the Affordable Care Act, which they did. But the way they did it gives such incredible power to RFK Jr. to do not just what he's doing now, but what he had made clear he was going to do at the time the Supreme Court decided. So this is not something they walked into eyes closed. I mean, they knew what they were doing. So this is, you know, when Congress passed the Affordable Care Act, one of the pieces of the Affordable Care Act that's been so important for people around the country is Congress mandated that preventive services be covered by insurance and be covered without cost sharing, so without a deductible, without a copay. And the idea was, you know, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? That it's much better to get people preventive services now so that they can avoid problems down the line rather than treat the problems down the line, which is going to be much worse for people's health and also more expensive for the system. And so the way they determined what are the preventive services to be covered. Obviously, you know, Congress passes this law in 2010, but the state of medical knowledge evolves. So they said, look, what we're going to do is we're going to have a couple of different bodies decide what are the preventive services that are required. So all of the vaccines that are recommended by the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices within the CDC, all of those vaccines every insurance company has to cover without copay or deductible. And then other kinds of services, we have this body that's existed since 1984 called the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force, an expert body. It's people who share their expertise. They mostly work outside of the government, but they share their expertise with the government to come up with recommendations about what kinds of health care people should get. Your doctor relies on these. You know, if you go to the doctor Your doctor will go through a checklist to decide, like, should I prescribe a statin to someone? Certainly at my age, I go through this conversation with my doctor every year. Should I get a statin or not? Because you look at various risk factors. When should women get mammograms? Should it be every year? At what age should it start doing? When should you get a colonoscopy, and how frequently, right? All this sort of stuff. USPSTF does this, and they use their expertise and they aggregate the information that's out there in the literature to decide what to cover. Okay, so some folks on the right didn't like certain things that the USPSTF and others said should be covered. In particular, pre-exposure prophylaxis to prevent HIV and AIDS among gay men. And so they sued and said, not just that we don't like this particular thing being covered, but that under the unitary executive theory, this whole structure is unconstitutional because you have experts deciding what are the preventive services that should be covered rather than people who are accountable to the president. And I mean, when you talk about it that way, I mean, do you want Donald Trump and RFK Jr. deciding what are the preventive services that you should be getting? Or do you want medical experts who are looking at the evidence, right? It's bonkers. So the Supreme Court, so the lower courts say, I mean, this is, I
didn't pick a case that you don't care about, obviously.
Yeah. Right. I mean, the district court in Texas and the Fifth Circuit, the conservative Fifth Circuit, they say this is unconstitutional. The president and the people who respond to the president should get to decide. So the government appeals, and I was actually general counsel to HHS when we brought the case to the Supreme Court, although it was argued in this administration. Yep. We appealed because, it shouldn't be unconstitutional. And the Supreme Court reversed the Fifth Circuit and said it's not unconstitutional. So that sounds like a win. But here's why they said it's not unconstitutional. They said the plaintiffs in this case are operating under a premise that's wrong. This statute does not provide for the experts to be insulated against the president and the secretary. Instead, it gives the secretary authority to fire all the experts and hire the ones he wants and to supervise them in ways that change their recommendations. And given that, we think it's constitutional. So it's a win in the short term, but then what that means is, if you're RFK Jr., you can fire everyone on this task force, as he did with firing everyone on the advisory committee on immunization practices. Yep. And he's probably going to do with this task force. And there's some indications that he's about to do that. And you can tell them what to recommend and what not to recommend. So our anti-vaxxer Secretary of Health and Human Services and his handpicked folks in the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, have said we're no longer recommending vaccines with thimerosal based on this debunked argument that thimerosal in vaccines causes.
It's not even worth saying anything about. Yeah.
And what's he going to say about the other recommended services? So birth control is one of the things that is covered here. Are they going to say we're not going to make that one of the recommended services that has to be covered? Very well likely. Are they going to say we're going to require that insurance companies cover health apps and wearables that happen to be marketed by the top advisors to RFK Jr., like Casey and Callie Means? Yeah, probably.
Yeah, no, it's all corrupt, right? If somebody can make money off of it and it's part of their crowd, it's going to be recommended.
Totally.
It's complete, crony capitalism, I guess, but it becomes enormously a public health problem.
Indeed.
Well, okay, so the Supreme Court, boy, have they been damaging. Do you want to say, while we're on the topic of sort of the rule of law, I mean, the Supreme Court should enable us to live in a nation of laws and rule of law, and this use of unsigned, unclear, I think you said belching out of dicta, it makes it so that even if you are an appellate judge or an attorney and you are trying to understand what the law is, because the Supreme Court tells us what the law is. You don't know. It's unclear now. They've made a hash of the rule of law in America.
Yeah, and, so I think that's right. If you're a conscientious lower court judge, you have no idea what the Supreme Court is saying the law is. Now, I think you can predict pretty well where they're going to go based on the partisan lean that they have shown. And I think that's the problem, right?
Yes, so you've substituted partisanship for jurisprudence, and that's not the rule of law.
Right. That's exactly, if they're going to just keep ruling in ways that seem on their face to be best explained by their sympathy for Trump and his project, and they're not going to give any explanation to the contrary. Meanwhile, we have the dissenters, continually saying, hey, here's why we think you're wrong. We have lower court judges who are equally conscientious, who have been working hard and who have issued these opinions, issuing injunctions that are getting stayed with no reasoning. I mean, what can we conclude but that this is corrupt, essentially the judicial branch of the Republican National Committee instead of the judicial branch?
Yeah. And just to go back to the beginning, when we talked about lines we don't cross because we believe in a democracy, Sam, if somebody said you can appoint 5 Supreme Court justices tomorrow, and all of the 6 if you want, the Republicans are gone, you would not, under any circumstances, I can imagine, appoint 6 left-leaning Alitos, left-leaning Thomases, because that's not what you want. You want somebody who's a jurist.
Yeah, I mean, I think you want people who are going to engage seriously with the legal questions in front of them, and I think, I have deep disagreements with not just the partisanship of this court, and I think it really is partisan, but also the jurisprudence that they articulate when they articulate a jurisprudence, this idea of originalism as being the thing that drives us, this idea of text as being the only thing that matters. I think that fundamentally misconceives the role of a judge in a democratic society. And I think that these have been judges who have, interfered very greatly with democratic decisions in ways they shouldn't. And, I think we ought to be having conversations about those kinds of questions when we're talking about what kinds of judges to appoint. But, the idea that the Biden administration gets hit with injunction after injunction, nationwide injunction after nationwide injunction, asks the Supreme Court on multiple occasions, can you step in and stop this practice? Because it's making it hard for us to govern, and the Supreme Court just ignores them ignores us. I was in the Biden administration. I was part of some of these cases for 4 years. And then it picks not just the Trump administration, but the most obviously unconstitutional thing and most devastating thing the Trump administration is doing for democracy and equality in this country, the birthright citizenship executive order, as the time it's going to say, oh, by the way, no such thing as a nationwide injunction, or at least, very limited. That's the moment they're going to step in. It really makes them look like they're just partisan, and they have they can give no reason. They've tried to give no reason to justify their pattern of results here. So what else are we going to think?
I think the truth, and you've been clear about that. I agree. Let's spend a minute, because we only have a little bit of time left, on their administration's attack on civil society, not government itself, but broader civil society. I mean, you work at a university. I think, this week the Corporation for Public Broadcasting fell, and that was after the capitulation of CBS. So journalism deeply damaged. Columbia, Brown, George Mason, now maybe Harvard. So journalism, higher ed, all capitulating. I feel like I'm listening to the radio in 1940 in June and hearing that France has fallen. Dark days, Sam.
Yeah, no, they are really dark days. As someone who, as you say, works in a university, I really feel it. And I think you've really put your finger on the phenomenon here, which is the president and the people around him understand that having independent knowledge-generating institutions or independent sources of authority in society creates a real threat to their ability to consolidate power. And so, they've been laser focused on going after these civil society institutions, going after universities, with the executive orders beginning on day one of the administration, going after law firms, big law firms, where, a number have capitulated, a number have fought, going after press institutions. Part of that is the libel suits I was talking about. Part of it is, like CBS making this ridiculous settlement of a phony libel suit. There's no legal basis for the lawsuit they settled. They agree to spend millions of dollars, but even more important than that, they agree to have someone in their news division essentially reporting to the White House to make sure that what they're doing is what they're doing in their journalism is something the White House thinks is fair. That's not the role of journalists, and then
it's the role of Pravda.
Right. No, right? Exactly.
Right. Yeah. But by the way, Pravda means truth. So, there we are. Truth Social on CBS. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. And so, that's just that is and we see these attacks. We've seen the FCC under Brendan Carr, Trump's appointee, initiating investigations of entities that are engaged in journalism that he doesn't like. So again, same thing. But as soon as CBS enters into this agreement paying a ransom to Donald Trump and making clear that they're not going to do any journalism that offends Donald Trump in the future, well, lo and behold, the FCC approves their merger, right? Which, of course, is exactly what they were holding over the head of the folks who own CBS.
I guess I have to ask you this as a law professor. How is it that a lawsuit becomes just a vehicle for a bribe?
Yeah. I think it's really...
Because they wouldn't have lost. It was a frivolous lawsuit, and they decided to file. Trump decided to file it, and CBS decided to use that in order to pay him to get what the corporation wanted.
Yep. No, totally. And we've seen that a few times now.
Yeah. Well, we have. I wish we'd covered all the assaults, but you have Emil Bove becoming a judge for life. You have Pam Bondi. Or somebody in the prison system moving Giselle Maxwell, which means they had to say, well, you're not really a child molester because child molesters aren't allowed where they moved, or a child trafficker or whatever it is that she did. There isn't any reality basis other than their tactics to gain and consolidate power that explain this administration.
Yeah, indeed.
Sam, how are your students handling this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think for a lot of students, they come to law school and they really look up to the law as an institution. They think of the law as something that, is sort of exalted, and then they think of judges as very exalted. And I think this is a bit of a rude awakening for a lot of them. I will say that the law has not always operated in a way that liberates or promotes democracy, and we are going through a period like that now. And so I think it's good for the students to see that, but I also hope they see that there are people who are doing their best to use the law to advance democracy, to protect, the basic core due process rights and free speech rights of folks in our society. And, that there will be another side. We'll get to another side here. We've had really dark days before in this country. When Reconstruction ended, the first Red Scare, McCarthyism, a lot of the repression in response to the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s was no joke. And yet we got past that. And I think some people sort of my age started to think, well, maybe we believe this idea of a uniformly bending arc toward justice, and it's just not how it works. It's always
not how it works.
And that's what we're relearning. It's always been a fight, and maybe it always will be. But I hope my students, realize that democracy is worth fighting for, and, basic human rights are worth fighting for, and that there are a lot of people doing that.
Sam, as always, I really appreciate your work and your time and how you help us understand this moment.
Well, thank you.
And I hope we talk again soon.
Okay, sounds good.
Take care. Bye.
You too.
Bye.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Welcome back, everybody. A little after 2 o'clock here in the Great Lakes, the upper Midwest. Former Congressman Joe Walsh joined the Democratic Party after his Republican Party abandoned its heritage and embraced a corrupt autocratic cult. Joe wasn't having any part of that. He and I have been talking about how to do something we Democrats haven't, been used to doing, which is to bring the fight to the other guy's turf. So, Joe, welcome.
Edwin, it's always good to be with you, my friend.
Hey, look, so this week we saw that Donald Trump will fire anyone who tells the truth. We already know he'll hire anyone who will lie. And we see him screwing Americans and pocketing our cash. This is your old party is just sitting there saying, yeah, that sounds like the America we like.
Yeah, and to your point at the top, my friend, they recognize, look, the Republican Party and Trump, my former party, they're very open about what they want to do to this country. I mean this, and I wish every Democrat in America could hear it. They want it to be a white, Christian, nationalist, authoritarian place. And Democrats need to understand this. They're not playing around. Donald Trump is not playing around. And until the Democrats, my friend, recognize this moment, Trump's going to keep steamrolling over all of us.
Well, he wants, as you say, white Christian nationalist, the same crowd that marched on Charlottesville that he said were very good people. That's who he thinks the country is. It's not, but that's who he thinks the country is, and that's why they're trying to make us into that kind of country. And in Charlottesville, they were shouting, Jews will not replace us. And I don't recall Trump saying anti-Semitism is a problem back then. But if, Brown University has one student on campus who says, I'm concerned about Israel, suddenly he's going to shut the whole university down, right? This is all BS. And I don't understand really why. I mean, there are Democrats who say it, but they don't have the power right now. I'm going to have to wrestle it from the Republicans who do. But I didn't really expect the Republicans to be willing to let this and all the graft, just to let it happen.
Yeah, I did. And again, my vantage point was skewed and a little different than yours because I come from them. I come from them. And they would tell me privately what they wanted to do. And by the way, Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, they've moved beyond private. I mean, Mike Johnson has spoken a number of times publicly about America getting back to its white Christian roots. They've said that they want it to be a white Christian country. And the only point I'm trying to make as a new Democrat is to just shake our fellow Democrats up and get them to understand that this is not a normal time and understand that we are at war. I mean, we are figuratively speaking. No, we are at war to save this 249-year-old experiment.
Yeah. And Joe, you and I don't know, white men, I'm Jewish, but I know, but I'm like my bride isn't. I mean, white Christians have done a lot of good in this country, but when they say they want this country to be white and Christian, they have something very specific in mind. And it isn't, Abe Lincoln, who was a white Christian. It isn't George Washington, who was a white Christian. They have in mind an intolerance and a fear that I would hope that the white Christians in this country will say, whoa, that's not us.
This experiment in democracy, Edwin, this is all about anybody can come in here and believe in any God or not believe in a God. This is what has made America so special. And look, 249 years later, one of our two major political parties now believes we've lost our way. They believe this country was founded to be a Christian country, not a secular nation. It's part of why we watch Trump's cruelty on our streets every day as they grab brown and black people and detain and disappear them off of our streets. We talk about the Christian aspect of their vision, my friend, but they harken back to when this was a white country primarily.
Well, Joe, it never was. But the people who weren't white didn't have any power. They were enslaved or they were Native American. But this continent always was a mix. Since people started to come here from Europe, it was always a mix. And in the South before the Civil War, white people weren't even the majority in some of these states.
Yes.
But they held all of the power. So what you're really saying is they want to go back to an era where some people hold all of the power if they're white. And if they have a crusader view of religion, which is to say everyone else will bow to my God and my interpretation of God. A God who says you can have an abortion isn't a God to them. Right? So this is the view they want.
Well, and again, because I used to be of them, this is what they would tell me. And I still engage with the Republican Party base. And they hearken back to this mythical 1950s. And when I ask them to explain what that means, it really gets down to a few things. But one of them is, we only had two genders, and men married women and women married men, and everybody worked at the local plant in town, and this was primarily a white Christian country. They give me that vision of the 50s, which is crazy, but that's what they seek.
And they seek it because why? We also had polio. We also had, right? There were a lot of things. We died much younger. Cancer, smoking and cancer were prevalent everywhere. It wasn't a golden age. We've made a lot of progress since then. Maybe it felt less complicated because, I don't know, because their parents had suffered through the Depression and World War II, and they were too young to know, so they thought, wow, times are simple and good. But I don't get it.
And again, I think a key word, my friend, you just said, it was in their mind, it was a more simple time. And in their defense, not defending their vision, because I find their vision abhorrent.
No, you're explaining, not defending.
Yes,
I get it.
Look at how, and you and I are a couple old white dudes, but look at how life and society have changed in the last 15 to 20 years. A lot of our listeners right now forget that even 12, 13 years ago, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton opposed same-sex marriage. So the average Republican white base voter out there, their heads have been spinning for the last 20 years because they tell me, Joe, it's like every time I wake up, something's new and different. I don't understand the world. It's complicated. I got to be careful what pronouns I use. And so on and on it goes. And I choose not to make fun of these folk. I try to engage with these folk and help them understand.
Well, so I get that. I mean, the world is changing faster than it ever did. And American society has always been the most dynamic in the world. So our society has always changed faster than any, and that is head spinning and difficult on the left and on the right, confusing.
Yeah.
And it's out of that confusion that we build this nation, but it is hard. I grant you that it's hard. It requires leaders who will tell us it's hard and tell us how to move through it, as FDR did. I mean,
you nailed it. And on the Republican side, because I was a Republican my whole life, we didn't have those leaders. this churning among the base and the fear and the anger and the confusion, it's been there for a while. Remember, I come from the Tea Party. It's a big part of what the Tea Party was about. But the Republican Party establishment ignored their base and really wouldn't listen to these fears and concerns they had. And then along came Trump in 2015, and he said, I'm going to build a wall, I'm going to keep brown and black people out, and I'm going to make it legal to say Merry Christmas again. And everybody laughed at him except the Republican Party base. They said, finally, someone's listening to me. That's what's scary.
Well, so let's talk about what it's going to mean, because no one can stop this, the pace that the world is changing, not with all the power that our government has. And Donald Trump just wants it to change in certain ways. So yes. I don't know, how does your base feel about getting rid of the dollar and replacing it with Dogecoins? Right? I mean, like I don't know. Okay, that doesn't make any sense. That sounds pretty radical to me.
Yeah, I'm raising my hand because they don't understand any of that. Yeah, they don't.
Well, I mean, we got to tell them. I mean, the radical changes that they are blaming on Democrats. Yeah, no. I mean, Democrats have embraced some changes pretty fast, faster than maybe the public was ready to. But, oh my gosh, they didn't say, as this administration is, we're going to use the power of our government to ram it down your throats, to ban your books. The Republican base doesn't love banning books. On every poll there, it's like nobody likes banning books except a few people. So I think they've radicalized themselves past the base.
Oh, I think there's a lot of truth to what you say, because, look, to simplify everything, the Democratic Party was always the party of a more activist government to enact change and help deal with change. And the Republican Party, we always said, no, a more limited government. But now the Republican Party is super radicalized. Like, they now want to use government to force us back into the America they envision. I say often that they've given up on democracy. Like, they love Trump because he's an authoritarian. He's a strong man. They've told me a bunch of times they don't believe the democratic process can get us America back, their America. So they want a strong man to get it back for them.
Well, that makes no sense. Let's stop being a democracy in order to become one. Yeah, oops. By the way, we weren't really, Joe, the first presidential election where black Americans were allowed to vote in the whole country was 1968. That's not that long ago. Before then, we didn't have the Voting Rights Act, which soon we won't have again. And across large parts of the country, black Americans weren't allowed to vote in presidential elections. So we had, a limited democracy. It got a little bit bigger. And now you're saying, like, your party just doesn't like that, doesn't want it to be bigger, doesn't want to share this power with people here. And I guess it's up to the rest of us to do what has always been done, which is to say, don't pay attention, don't outsource your work to the lawyers, organize, get out there, build the coalitions, get people fired up, and go throw them out of office.
Maybe you disagree with me, but I always think the right in this country has always been much more open to authoritarianism. Like, they're more open to a strong man forcing change, I think much more so than the left in this country. Edwin, there are a big aspect of the right is, embracing what's going on in Hungary and embracing other strong men around the world. There are people on the far right that like Putin. So this is a real concern. When I say they've given up on democracy, they don't quite know what that means. They just mean Donald Trump is going to deliver us to the promised land again. And we Democrats just need to defeat this, period. Absolutely. We just need to we're not changing their minds. We need to beat them at the polls.
Yep. Well, and we're going to get some help because the truth is they're incompetent at governing. I mean,
yes.
the jobs numbers are terrible, and they're going out and saying on TV, the jobs numbers are great. Hint, the jobs numbers were pretty good when Joe Biden was president, but because the economy is so uneven, people didn't feel it. So when he went out and said, you know what, the economy's pretty good, it was, but because it didn't match people's lives, they said, yeah, no, he's lying. When Donald Trump goes out and says it's the strongest economy in the history of the world, while jobs numbers are actually going down, while inflation is going back up, that doesn't matter how many times they lie. People are going to know.
Yeah, and again, you and I are both politicians as well. A big problem the Democratic Party had is we really did not have a president for 4 years communicating with the American people. Like if Joe Biden were younger, when he first got elected in January of 25, January of 21, he should have gotten in front of the American people right away and said, here's what the next 4 years are going to look like. We're coming out of a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic, and let's get through this together. Biden was incapable, because he was too damn old, of communicating to the American people, so that Trump and the rest of the Republicans could say our economy sucks when it didn't.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, Joe was, I liked him. I thought he was a good president. I did. But in retrospect, every single day, he should have been talking about how terrible the guy was before him. He should have said, you don't like inflation. Here's why we have it. This man mangled our ports, closed, did a terrible job with our supply chains during the pandemic. You just should have gone after him every day. Instead, he didn't. And we didn't have a primary, so there was no interest on our side. And Donald Trump got to have the microphone in front of him, and play the victim as he was being convicted of 34 felonies.
The bully pulpit, probably a president's most powerful tool. And again, I think Biden had a very successful first term, but he never, ever was able to use that bully pulpit.
I agree.
And the American people did not understand what we were going through. We had the strongest, by far, post-COVID economic recovery of any industrialized nation. It's not even close. But yet that wasn't communicated.
No, it wasn't believed for sure. But in part, Joe, because and this goes back to the empathy that you have for that base. In part, it wasn't believed because the structure of our economy is so tilted toward the billionaires that a lot of people didn't feel it, and that's frustrating, and that's something that Donald Trump is only going to make worse, and your party is making worse. This big, beautiful bill was really the better billionaire bill, I guess. I mean, not helpful for ordinary Americans.
Well, and see, this will be, if Democrats can voice this will be Trump's downfall, because Trump can lie about everything and the base believes him. I won the 2020 election. They're eating cats and dogs. But Trump can't lie about their economy because they live their economy. So they know how much stuff costs, and they know if they have a job or not, and they know how their 401k is doing, and on and on and on. So Trump will try to lie about the economy, but they live the economy, and he's not going to succeed doing it.
Yeah, and he'll try and blame somebody else. As he did this week by firing the statistician. Oh, my gosh. The numbers are bad. Fire the statistician. But there's nobody to blame. He has all the power. And the Supreme Court has said, you have all the power, all of it. So he's got nobody to blame but himself.
Well, and call me a naive idealist, but every one of these tariffs is unconstitutional. He does not have the authority to issue any tariffs. And I still believe the Supreme Court within the next 8 months, is going to rule all of his tariffs unconstitutional and then void. It would be something. It should do.
Because lower courts will do it. I don't know about the Supreme Court. They're in the tank. But lower courts might do it.
Lower courts are in fact doing it. But his tariffs... And all of his deportations, all of this stuff is having a profound effect on the economy.
Yes, and I think on the American psyche. I mean, Americans do not like masked thugs taking people off the streets. And they just don't like it. It makes everybody uncomfortable. I think we want our disappearances to happen in secret behind, where we don't get to see them. They make us uncomfortable. Even the people who believe in them don't want to have to see it. I mean, did anybody like Kristi Noem standing in front of the prison in El Salvador? Did that really move the base?
Yes, most of the base loved that. Now,
wow.
This is, oh God, yeah. I mean, you should listen to what I hear every day. They love what's going on, but that's not most of the country. You are right, my friend. It's abject cruelty, and you can say a lot of things about the American people, but the vast majority of us are not cruel. So this is going to hurt Republicans politically big time, and it should.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's only going to get more obvious as they staff up before the next election. It's only going to get more obvious as they militarize our government more or politicize our military more. I mean, the people I talk to in the military are appalled that it's being dragged into a partisan fight.
Well, I think I know you and I have said this before. Everybody listening right now in August of 25, if things are really going horribly for Republicans next year, this guy in the White House will do what he can to mess up the elections or try to prevent the midterm elections from happening. And don't anybody say I'm crazy, because we've lacked imagination in this Trump era for how low he would go and how bad he'd get.
I agree with you entirely, Joe. I do think that some of the efforts from the left-leaning think tanks that have tried to imagine what Donald Trump could do in order to get ahead of it to protect us, they didn't have you or me there with them to say, wait a minute, you got to go further.
Exactly.
I mean, I do, that we will see vast numbers of Homeland Security officials in their gear and their masks, and maybe with U.S. military with them at polling places in the next election where there are districts with immigrants saying, oh, well, the illegals are voting and we're here to stop them. But that's not what's happening. They're there to suppress votes. And I'm sure that's coming. Yeah.
And again, he's an idiot. He's not subtle. I mean, he said a month and a half ago, I'm going to send troops into blue states and blue cities. He's told us he's going to do this. So that the party needs two old white guys like you and I teaching them how to fight.
I'm seeing some hope. I'm seeing some fighting out there. It's just, until we have a candidate, Joe, it's very hard for people it's in this attention economy, it's hard to get. I mean, my governor is out there. The governor of California is out there. They're all testing what works in a little bit. But I see people, I mean, Chris Murphy in the Senate this week, he was out there really saying, like, let's not even vote for a budget. Let's just not give this man any money. And I think that's right. I think we have to be as tough as we've ever been.
I have hope, and maybe like you do as well, because when I talk to Democratic voters, just grassroots folk, they're every bit as pissed off as you and I are.
They are so pissed off, and they should be.
Yeah.
Because they're like, right? I mean, the world that they grew up in is they're being told by their president that world is immoral, that world is unjust, that world is unfair, that if you reach out and you help somebody who's down, you're actually committing a DEI crime, and they nobody thinks that taking Jackie Robinson's history off a bookshelf is seriously. I mean, anybody who loves baseball is like, what the hell, man? You're crazy.
But I got to tell you, I'm more pissed at his enablers. I believe Donald Trump is a fascist, but it's the fascist enablers. I mean, look at what happened this week, Edwin. The Smithsonian. Trump demanded they remove all references to him in their public impeachment exhibit in the museum. Now we can get mad at Trump for doing that, but my God, the Smithsonian agreed to lie about American history.
And the only man impeached twice in American history is Donald Trump.
Yes.
Right. And so we're not going to have that there. By the way, you know who the chairman of the board of the Smithsonian is?
Who?
John Roberts.
I did not know.
John Roberts. He is the chairman of the Smithsonian board. So there you have it.
Well, there you go. You got me there. I didn't know that. But how can they do it?
In the tank is in the tank.
These are historians, Edwin. These are historians, and they agreed to lie about American history because he forced them to. Oh my God.
Yeah. Not any better than CBS News or the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, to its credit, said, we're not going along. We're out of business, and they're gone. They are a casualty of this fight. So,
all these colleges and universities bending the knee.
I know. Well, a couple are trying to fight back, but it's very tough for them. Very tough. Law firms. It's going to be regular people that save us, not the institutions this time.
Agreed.
All right, man. This was great. Let's do it again, and then again, and then again, because people have to hear this.
Amen, my brother. Amen. We'll talk soon.
All right, Joe. Take care. All right, everybody. Former Congressman and current Democrat Joe Walsh. I have after the break, we're going to come back and go into two taped interviews that I caught up earlier this week. One of them is with economist Robert Shapiro, who you may remember. He was in the Obama and in the Clinton administrations. Really interesting man. That's coming up. Stay tuned.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Economist Robert Shapiro is a Washington Monthly contributing writer, the chairman of an investment firm, a fellow at the McDonough School of Business at Georgetown University. He's also been a senior advisor on economic matters to Democratic presidents when they balanced the budget, invested America, and grew our economy. Thank you so much for joining me.
It's my pleasure.
Hey, as we speak, the market is tumbling on weak jobs numbers, increased tariffs, ongoing uncertainty. The list is long. Increased corruption, the erosion of the rule of law. You've warned of dire consequences ahead. Can you help us unpack all of this?
Certainly. This is something of a perfect storm, and it hasn't fully hit yet. You're right that tariffs are driving down imports and exports, and they're raising prices. And because they're raising prices, when the price of something you need goes up and you have to buy it, that means you have less money left for everything else. And so we saw in the second quarter, and that's before the full tariffs have kicked in, consumption, the rate of growth of consumption fell by 50% versus last year. It was very slow. Same thing has happened in business investment. Residential investment, which is home sales, contracted in the second quarter. And in the first quarter, the whole economy contracted. So we are operating with a very weak economy. Part of that is from the tariffs. Part of that is from interest rates inching up. And they're inching up in part because we're also facing unprecedented federal deficits. You know, people have been warning about the deficit for 20 years, and all those warnings didn't come to fruition. Now they are coming to fruition, and the reason is, in the 1890s, it represented an average of 2% of GDP. In the 2000s, before the financial crisis, it fell to 1.5% of GDP. Post-financial crisis, through Obama and Trump won, it was 3.6% of GDP. Today, we're looking at 7% of GDP. So that's double the rate under Obama and Trump won. And the problem is that all private savings, deficits have to be financed from savings, and all private savings by households, businesses, is equivalent to 7.7% of GDP. And so interest rates are being squeezed up. Now, we don't depend only on American savings. We also depend on foreign savings. And foreign investors already own 30% of the federal debt, 30% of all corporate bonds, and 27% of all stocks. So we've been dependent on foreign savings for a long time. But now the economy it really is on a tripwire that can be triggered by any reduction in foreign investment in treasuries and in stocks and in corporate paper in the United States. And this is foreign investment from countries that Trump is battering with tariffs. It's a very dangerous situation. Yeah, and so the market. Yeah.
Go ahead. Well, I want to just
is looking at all this.
I don't fully understand everything you said, so not being an economist. So I want to just dig a little bit. So when you talk about how the debt, the cumulative deficits is our debt. That's just they add up every year.
Right.
Right. So we end up with this debt, and it has to be financed. We borrow every year to do it. And you're saying the money from that borrowing has to come out of somebody's savings, and they have to be willing to loan it to us.
Right.
And
exactly.
I, now that we've just added, 4 trillion to our deficit. That would be 4 trillion more. The debt will grow every year. So the debt is bigger than 4 trillion. The deficit is just the annual hole we dig.
Well, the deficit, 4 trillion, is the accumulated increase in the debt over the next decade. What we're looking at really are annual increases in the deficit of $400 billion on top of the underlying deficit, which is already almost $2 trillion.
So we have two. Well, my question about all of that is there, there's a lot of money in the world, but how much appetite is there? Can the world absorb, even if they wanted to, where is the money going to come from to continue to loan to the United States?
That's the question that markets are asking too.
Right, and then you just have to print it, I guess.
Well, the only alternative, if foreign lending goes down, interest rates will begin to spike, which will shut down the economy. The only way to finance deficits apart from that is to print the money. The problem is that increases inflation, and as inflation increases, interest rates rise. And so Trump's policies have put the American economy in a box. And at this point, the only thing that is keeping us above water is what I call the kindness of strangers. That is the willingness of foreign investors to continue to finance these deficits. And it's not just the deficits, because the national debt, bonds mature, and then you have to pay off the bonds,
pay them off,
and then you have to refinance them.
Yep.
So it's not just the deficit; it's a lot more than that that we're dependent on.
Yeah, and for years, when Democrats were in control, Republicans hammered away on the deficit, and Democrats' reaction to it was, you just don't like what we're spending on. You just want to make sure we don't spend any money on anybody. So the natural reaction on the left is to say deficit hawks are crying wolf. But you're part of that left, and you're saying, you know what? No, it's actually gotten to the point where it's real.
Exactly. They have cried wolf, and the wolf is finally here.
Yeah.
The market was the global market was willing to finance deficits in the past, which were between a third and a half the size as a share of the economy of today's deficits.
Right.
So they could finance them. What's changed is the dimensions of the deficit, and that is attributable virtually entirely to Trump's tax program. That's what's happening here.
Before we get into that, I have an interest rate question. Because, you talked about the difficulty if the interest rate goes up. It's harder to pay off our obligations, and costs go up. So Mr. Trump has argued interest rates have to come down. In fact, he's willing to break the independence of the Fed in order to make interest rates go down. Why is he wrong?
Well, the reason he's wrong, he's wrong for two reasons. One is that if you cut interest rates in an environment in which inflation is rising, then it just feeds the inflation and undercuts the reduction in interest rates. Inflation is rising, and the reason it's rising is Trump's totally mindless tariff program, which is pushing up the price of all imports,
everything,
pushing them up substantially. We're looking now at kind of an overall tariff rate of around 20%. That's Smoot-Hawley levels.
Which, for those of you who don't know that, Smoot-Hawley was a bill that happened in the 1920s that many people think led to the Great Depression. No.
Right. But the other thing that Trump doesn't understand is that the Fed only controls short-term interest rates. The rates they actually control, the one rate they really control is what's called the federal funds rate. And that's the interest rate that a bank will pay another bank for an overnight loan. Now, that's often tied to what's called the Treasury bill rate. And that's the rate for 3-month loans. Everything longer than that, the 5-year bond or note, the 10-year bond, the 20-year, the 30-year bond, mortgage rates, car loan rates, the prime business rate, all of those rates are not set by the Fed. They're set by the markets. And so you can drive down the short-term rate, but the market says, now, is all you've done here is add to inflationary pressures which means we need a higher return when we lend you money, because some of it is going to be lost to inflation. And so I expect that when the Fed cuts interest rates, the initial response of the market is that the longer-term rates won't move at all, and then they will begin to edge up.
So what you're describing...
He doesn't understand how interest rates work.
Well, what you're describing is that the job of the Fed is a highly technical job with limited tools that help control inflation and maybe employment levels in the U.S. by balancing those. And they simply do not have the power to erase the market when it comes to interest rates in an economy. And that's what Trump doesn't understand.
And particularly, one of the reasons the deficit hawks were always wrong was that, apart from the fact that the deficits were much, much smaller than they are today as a share of the economy, is that the economy was recovering from a terrible crisis. So there was, an appetite for investment as the economy was recovering, and so they had very loose monetary policy in order to meet that appetite, because the appetite had been so depressed by the financial crisis and the Great Recession. Same thing happened with the pandemic.
That's no longer true, though.
No, and we recovered from the financial crisis. But that's why it worked. Why large deficits, even though they were small relative to this one, and very low interest rates worked.
There's another aspect of his tariffs that I'm just coming to understand, I think. He's in these so-called deals, like the one he just made with Japan. He says, "Okay, we're gonna slap you with a 15%. We're gonna slap Americans with a 15% tax on anything we import from your country. But also, you're going to have to invest in America, and I am going to be able to tell you where to invest." That just sounds so massively corrupt to me. Any sound investor looks at a corrupt place like that and says, "I don't know if I can put my money there."
Right. Well, there are two things to remember when Trump talks about this. One is that he is turning the American government's role in the economy into crony capitalism, which is corrupt. That is, you give me money, you're nice to me, I'll give you a break. It usually involves industries and companies that contribute a great deal to his campaigns. This is an administration that is operating substantially on the basis of extortion. That's what we saw with Trump's attacks on law firms. That's what we saw with Trump's attacks on universities. He's extorting money, right? They're going to spend all this money on causes that he supports in order to escape these arbitrary attacks on streams of federal funds or for the law firms in lieu of scaring the clients the law firm's clients that the government will always rule against them.
Yeah.
So that's part of what's happening.
It's a terrible business environment. Go ahead.
And corrupt economies and corrupt governments never produce strong economies. And the reason is that resources are distributed based on who you know, not on whether it's efficient and going to produce a high return. The Russian economy is a great example of this. Mm-hmm. And one of the results was that Ukraine was able to fight them to a stalemate. And the reason was all those military contracts, which had been given out based on, relationships with Putin and those immediately under him, they produced lousy equipment.
Yeah.
They produced lousy training because they didn't get the contracts based on their ability to produce sound equipment and sound training.
Right.
So it has a lot of after effects. But the other thing that's happening here is Trump announces that Japan is going to invest $500 billion in the United States, and he's going to determine it. Well, half of that is already investments that have already begun or were already scheduled to begin. That is, building a new Toyota factory, for example. Mm-hmm. The rest of it can't be enforced because it's not the government that's doing the investing.
Right, it's private sector. Yeah,
it's the corporations in that country.
Yeah.
And Japan, when he announced this figure, Japan said, we don't know what he's talking about. And the same thing is true of all of these announcements.
Yes, smoke and mirrors being his thing. Yeah.
Lies.
Lies, that's a better word for it. So there's one other thing that impacts our economy, I think a lot, that we haven't talked about, and I doubt for the better. But deporting millions of people and spending and taking government spending, and instead of investing it in things that grow the economy, to take $165 billion and invest it in an internal prison camp system and rounding people up and throwing them out, that doesn't benefit our economy in any way, right? That just makes this problem worse.
It hurts the economy. It hurts the economy because unauthorized immigrants or undocumented immigrants are concentrated in a small number, in a handful of industries. They're concentrated mainly not in agriculture, but in construction. Mm-hmm. And in personal services. Personal services means restaurants, hotels, lots of hospitality companies. Well, to the extent that they lose workers and find it hard to recruit workers because other immigrants are afraid of being rounded up, they have to pay more in order to attract their new workers. And so it becomes both inflationary and it also slows the growth of those companies. So it's a unalloyed negative for the United States.
Yeah, and this investment of billions of dollars isn't like an investment in roads and airports and other forms of transit that can actually help the economy. It's a just lost money in a I guess a swamp.
And it appears that much of the point of this campaign for deportations is a public demonstration of force and cruelty. Because the numbers still are not that large.
That's correct.
But everybody sees this, and Trump and his advisors have believed that this would redound to their political benefit, but it hasn't. And because the public is repelled by the cruelty.
Yeah.
And, they look at it and they say, hey, that's not what I thought this country was about. And it's not what this country is about. It's what Donald Trump and his inner circle is about.
Yeah. Hey, you and your colleagues in the world of, economists rely on government data. And
yes.
How worried are you that you can no longer trust government data, either because they've laid off everyone who would collect it, or because they just want to lie?
Well, when I was in government, one of my jobs was I oversaw two of the three major statistical agencies. The Bureau of Economic Analysis, which puts together all the components of GDP,
yep,
and the Census Bureau.
Yep.
And these are, I am not worried yet. And the reason is these are such professional organizations. There are virtually no political appointees. They're all statisticians. And their constituency is other statisticians. And if the administration, if the political appointee at the top said, we don't like this inflation report, that would be from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or we don't like this report on business investment. See what you can do to boost it. They would go to the press.
As they have in FBI, as they have in Justice, and yet it's happening there. So, yeah.
Right, and now,
but it hasn't happened yet, which is what you're telling me, and I like that. Yeah. Go ahead. You're concerned.
The thing that concerns me would be deep budget cuts to these agencies. That's what can make the data inaccurate, rather than direct political interference.
Yep.
But, it may be that, and I would expect them to focus mainly on the Bureau of Labor Statistics, because that produces the inflation numbers, and inflation is, a very sensitive political issue right now.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, there are a lot of private surveys that are also tracking prices. If the budget cuts degraded the quality of the data enough so that the result, so that it affected the results in any meaningful way, the market is going to know it, because they've got all these other sources of information.
Yeah. Rob, one other thing. Are you confident that in a corrupt administration there, even if the data is honest, there's an enormous advantage to getting a sneak peek at it? Are there protections so that the data becomes public when it becomes public and cronies don't get an early look?
Yes and no. I'll tell you how it works. The data is very private to the agencies that produce them. the day before any major release from the BEA, from the Bureau of Economic Analysis or the Census Bureau, which, tracks, for example, housing,
yep.
Or the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the day before it's released, they send it to three places. They send it to the Council of Economic Advisors. They send it to the Treasury, and they send it to the Fed. And you have to rely on the honesty of the people at the White House who received this data the night before. And
there's no relying on that. I'm sorry. That's gone. There's no relying on that.
Well, that means that, particularly in an administration that runs on money, and in particular the money of the richest people in the country, I would be unsurprised if there weren't leaks of this information to, places like Andreessen. I'm not saying Andreessen, but
I understand.
Places, that is
people who know how to
financial, right?
Yep.
And people with the resources to profit from it.
Yep.
Really profit from it. Who can make $1 billion bet.
Yeah.
As opposed to $100 bet.
Well, you and I've run out of time, and this was fascinating. I hope we get to do it again sometime. I fear this topic is going to require more attention, not less attention, in the coming months.
Oh, it's going to require regular attention because all the trajectories right now are negative. All the risks are on the downside. That's just where we are.
That's where we are. Well, thank you, Rob. I really appreciate your expertise and the time that you've given to help explain it to the rest of us.
Anytime.
Take care.
You too. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You're looking at the big picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Melissa Sanchez reports for ProPublica. Her work focuses on unforgivable things: children working in factories, working conditions for immigrants in dairy farms, what the low-wage economy really means for people trapped in it. And most recently, she and a team of journalists really dug into and built a database of all 230 of the Venezuelan men who were captured. I guess it's the best way to describe what happened, and sent to, I also guess the best word is dungeon, that Seacoast prison, that place where Kristi Noem thought it was her duty as a cabinet secretary to go down and have a fashion shoot in front of captives who were forced to watch from their cages. This is the administration we're in. And Melissa has talked to the people who've been released. She knows what went on there, and she knows the cost, the human cost of this fiasco. Melissa, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Your terrific reporting made a bunch of things clear to me. And let's just talk about a few of them. First, for example, the abductions were based on really the lie that these men were criminals, all part of Tren de Agua. Talk about what you found.
So my colleagues and I obtained internal government records that showed how the government itself classified the men's criminality. And we focused our investigation on the 238 men whose names were on the first list that kind of circulated in the days after their detention or their deportation. And of those 238 men, I think 197 of them were listed as solely immigration violators, like not as people with convictions or not as people with pending charges. And for the others, what that meant was there were a number that had pending charges, but those tended to be for minor things like shoplifting, and those with convictions, the vast majority were for nonviolent offenses. There were maybe a half dozen that did have violent offenses as convictions. Mm-hmm. But I think what we could say is the vast majority of the people that we sent to this foreign prison that is known for torture and human rights abuses had no criminal records in the U.S., and the government knew it.
So just so I understand those numbers, about a half dozen, about 6 out of 238 is what, 2.5%? That's a lot of people who didn't when they said that's exactly what they were looking for.
That's right. And I mean, and we did find people beyond what was classified in the records. We found a handful of other folks with convictions or pending charges. But like I said, by and large, these were people who did not have records in the U.S.
Well, then why did they go after them? What was their thinking?
I mean, it's a lot of things. I mean, what we heard over and over, and we've interviewed the families, and now at this point, some of the men too, I think involving maybe 115 of the men. And we've looked at a lot of the records, and we have a pretty decent sense of what happened in their cases. And even though the government says the tattoos were not the main thing that was leading them to these supposed Tren members, that's exactly what we found. Like over and over, the one thing that these people had in common is that they had tattoos, tattoos of crowns or tattoos of stars. I mean, tattoos of Scrooge McDuck, tattoos of the Rugrats, tattoos of the dumbest things that you can imagine any young man might put on their body. Dollar bills. Like the names of their children or their wives or their moms, the dates of birth that the dates that their children were born. And I think that was the most common denominator that we found. And the government believes that makes you a member of Tren de Aragua, this Venezuelan gang.
Or believes it gives you a lie you can tell people. So they lied about going after people who were dangerous criminals, and then they also told us. They knew that they know that most of them, I guess half of them, were already in the immigration process, doing exactly what we asked them to do, going to court. That's not breaking the law. That's doing what we asked them to do.
Yeah, and the number's probably really higher. So, like, the vast majority of the men, I think nearly all of them, entered the U.S. in one of two ways. They either came in with what was called the CBP-1 app. This is like a Biden-era, like, phone app that they created so immigrants who wanted to come to the border could, like, sign up, register for an appointment, and show up at the border and say, and make their case for coming in.
Well, so hang on, so we can explain to people. The reason for that app was to stop this mass flow of people who were camped on the border trying to get in. This was an attempt to get them to register long before they showed up at the border so that there wouldn't be these mass caravans, as the Trump guys like to call them, right at the border.
Exactly. So it was to put order at the border. And so a lot of these guys, 50, 60 of them or so we found, had come in through that way. The others came in by crossing the border illegally, but then immediately looking for Border Patrol and turning themselves in and asking for asylum. And so what that means is, in both cases, they had entered the system. They were not absconding from the law like immigrants maybe in the past have. There are, I think I am aware of at least one or two that might have been in that absconding category, but by and large, the rest of them weren't. And of the 238 that we focused on, I think at least half of them at the time that they were picked up and shipped off to El Salvador, half still had open immigration cases. A lot of the other guys, their cases had been closed. They were in immigration detention at the time that they were deported. Or there were other issues going on. A lot of them had asylum cases. I think 60 of them had pending asylum claims through the court system. But in all of these different ways, a lot of them had TPS. I just talked to a man this morning. He had a work permit. A lot of them had work permits. They had legal documentation to be here while their case played out.
So again, for those of you listening, TPS is temporary protective status. That's when the United States says, yeah, you know what, right now it's too dangerous for you to be in your country. We're going to let you stay here for a little while. All of this is legal. All of this is contemplated by Congress and in the law and perfectly legal.
That's correct. No, in Venezuela, for those who aren't aware, I mean, the country's it's in a complicated place. It's had the same authoritarian government for many years. The economy has absolutely collapsed. It's got sanctions left and right. And people have been fleeing that country for the past decade. I think 7 or 8 million people have fled, mostly to surrounding countries, but in the last couple of years, they've been coming to the U.S.
Yep. Terrible humanitarian problem. Okay, so they lied about them being violent. They lied about them being here illegally. These are people who are here in the asylum process. Trump got rid of judges, so there's a backlog of taking care of that. Maybe they would have been deported anyway, but there's a legal way to do it. And instead, they just said, they got a tattoo, let's round them up. So they get shipped to this place. The administration says, we have no control of them. They're in a different country. We now know that wasn't true, right?
Well, I mean, the Salvadoran government has said that the U.S. still had jurisdiction over them. That's what they've said to the UN, according to court records. One of my colleagues was able to speak to the vice president of El Salvador, which I guess you can do sometimes. Yep. And he declined to acknowledge whether the U.S. had any involvement in what happened to those guys. The U.S. has told us that they had nothing. The Trump administration has told us they're kind of like lifting their hands up, that they had no jurisdiction over what happened to them there.
Well, hang on. They were swapped for a prison swap where Americans were released. The Trump administration is saying those Americans were released and they had nothing to do with it?
I don't know if they're saying that. But they're saying that they are not responsible for what happened to the Venezuelan men in El Salvador. Okay,
so they're under a contract with the United States government, and Kristi Noem goes down there and instead of inspecting the contractor, has this hideous fashion shoot. But what was going on behind her back? You now know that these men were tortured.
They were tortured. I think, for the past 4 months, we've been reporting on these men's lives, what we could tell from Venezuela and here. And we had speculations about what might be happening to them at Seco, a prison that has been known for human rights violations. But hearing it from their own mouth over the past couple of days has been really heartbreaking. These men talked about getting beat daily, getting batons, their heads whacked with batons until one of the guys I was talking to today told me his hair no longer grows in parts of his head that he was hit so often. Getting kicked by guards in these kind of steel-toed boots, getting punched, getting humiliated. A lot of us have seen the photos of these prisons in El Salvador where they make the men kind of kneel next to each other, like a whole line of them, very close together. And we heard over and over that these guys, who are basically just wearing shorts and sandals the whole time, they're almost naked. They're being made to lick the back of the man in front of them, or else. And I mean, why do you do that? I think there's this degradation. I heard of men being stripped naked so guards could walk on top of them. I've heard of guards beating their heads against the walls over and over. One man we talked to can't see very well out of one of his eyes anymore, and he thinks it's because of these constant beatings. Getting shot at with rubber pellets. One of the guys I was talking to today talked about parts of his lip almost falling off because he was hurt so bad, and then the kind of psychological torture that's harder to quantify, being told over and over that you're good for nothing, you're a gang member, you're a terrorist, nobody cares what's going to happen to you, you will die here, your family doesn't care about you, Maduro, the president of Venezuela, doesn't care about you. I talked to one man who said he heard this over and over and over, and he believed it. When he came out eventually and saw his family, he told me he was so relieved to learn that they hadn't forgotten about him. And that just hurts your heart to hear, that people actually believed that nobody cared about them anymore because they heard it so constantly from the guards.
Meanwhile, what was going on with their families? What did they know when the man disappeared?
I mean, they didn't know a whole lot. I mean, the story we heard consistently from families is that they were picked up because of their tattoos. I mean, this is what the men were told by immigration agents. Oh, your tattoos, you have a different process. And they would get their bodies photographed, and then they would just wait and then be told that they were gang members. And there was not a whole lot of an opportunity to argue that. The family members, once the men were sent to El Salvador, there was zero communication between them and their families. So the families did not know if they were alive or dead. And in Caracas, in the capital of Venezuela, a lot of the families kind of formed this committee, and they would have marches kind of asking Bukele, the president of El Salvador, to have some compassion as a father, to like pay attention to their own children and to treat them better, to let them go. They asked Maduro, the president of Venezuela, for help. They asked Trump to find it in his heart to release their sons. And they did this over and over. I mean, I talked to women, over the past few months who were so devastated that their blood pressure was going up. They had to start, they collapsed, they fainted, they went to the hospital, they started having medical problems they never had before. And I mean, they suffered a lot. And a lot of these guys, like I said, they had gotten work permits. They were working in the U.S. There was a lot of Grubhub drivers, like DoorDashers. But they made money here in the U.S. to support not just themselves and their families here, but to send money to their moms back home who needed cancer treatment, or to send money for their sisters to go to school, et cetera. And so there was a loss of income for these families that had gotten used to the remittances that they were getting back. But I mean, I think more than anything, just the families were really desperate and in pain. I ended up kind of inadvertently interviewing a 12-year-old girl who I found on TikTok. I didn't realize how old she was, and eventually I interviewed her kind of with the presence of her aunt, because her mom had died when she was a little kid, and her dad was in this prison, and she was just like waiting. She was making videos by herself on Facebook, like begging for her dad's return. It was just really hard to hear this.
Yeah, Melissa, I think Americans are aware of how much immigrants come to this country, migrants come to this country, work, they send money back home to their families, but they're not. The communication with their families home isn't broken. It's still strong. And I don't think Americans understand that while some of us here were protesting what goes on at CCOT and what this administration is doing for immigrants, so were large groups of people in Venezuela protesting what America was doing to people who were our guests coming here working.
Yeah, no, it kind of made a case that Maduro and Hugo Chavez before him were making against the U.S. When you go to Caracas, you hear often about the imperialist nation that, all sorts of terrible things about the U.S., which we may or may not want to believe ourselves. But what the U.S. did to these men kind of helped make Maduro's case that this country doesn't treat people well. And so people were out on the street denouncing the U.S., denouncing our imperialism here and like what we had done to these young men. Constantly they were out on the street and making all sorts of videos on TikTok and Facebook, doing interviews, just like begging for attention. They didn't want their sons to be forgotten. And the men, I mean, the ones I've spoken to 5 of them so far, they said that they were like I said, they didn't know if anybody even knew where they were. And so when they came out and they ended up seeing their relatives, they were shocked and like just so relieved to know that somebody was looking for them.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
I went through the database that you guys put together. And I wonder, I mean, can I just pick a few names and have you talk about them?
If I can remember them, yes, go. There's 238.
There are 238. I don't want to do that to you.
No, I mean it's fine. I wrote maybe half of those bios.
Well, like right at the beginning, there was a guy named Roger Eduardo Molina Acevedo.
Is he one of the ones who had a special refugee status?
Yeah, kind of, right? What was, they just seemed like they came here, they did everything they were supposed to do, came here to work. I mean, a few of them had these, as you say, were in the process, would have, in a normal process, been thrown out through a normal immigration process because of their crimes.
I think Roger is one of the really special ones because there were a handful of them who had this like extra special refugee status where they had gotten vetted by the U.S. government prior to boarding a plane and coming here. These were not people who had come in through that app or who had crossed the border illegal. These were people who the U.S. government had given permission to come, but then he was among those who was shipped off. Yeah. And I just pulled up his case, and when he got to the airport in Houston, immigration officers questioned him about his tattoos, which included a crown, a soccer ball, and a forest. He has zero criminal record in the United States.
Right, and he ended up in this torture place, this concentration camp. This awful. There were just a few that touched me. There was a guy I can't pronounce his name, Daniel Manzo Lovera. His story struck me. Edixon David Quintero Chacon, his story struck me. These were just guys trying to, get some extra dollars. They didn't do anything wrong, I don't think.
No, I mean, what they did was they came here in a moment that we didn't want any more immigrants to come. And we voted for a president who made a promise to get rid of immigrants. And I think it was not opportune. And they're men, and they're men with tattoos, which makes them scarier and kind of easier to single out. But the vast majority of these men were working kind of these jobs that we sort of don't even think about that exist quietly in our economy. Like I said, a lot of dordacheros is like the word, the DoorDash guys. There's a lot of barbers, a lot of construction workers, the guys who are laying shingles and putting up drywall. And these are the jobs that a lot of Americans don't really want to do anymore. They're immigrant jobs. They don't pay super well. But yeah, and then they have these tattoos. Like I just pulled up the last one you mentioned, Edixon. He has a tattoo with the little logo of Michael Jordan jumping midair.
Right, Michael Jordan logo.
Michael Jordan logo. I talked to the family of one boy who, I say boy because he's like 19, who's got the number 23 tattooed on his hand, and people who are from Chicago know that that's like Michael Jordan's number. People love Michael Jordan in the poor sectors of Venezuela. People love him. They love the Air Jordan shoes. And you'd see in the records that the immigration officers would note the Jordan logo or the Nike symbol as part of the reason why they had flagged somebody as Tren de Aragua.
Yeah. Okay, so I am so struggling to figure out how to think about this. The deportation effort is not about removing violent criminals from our streets. That was about 2%. That's just a lie. It's not about enforcing our immigration laws. That's a lie, because many of these deportees were going to court and following the process we set out. They were removed in an extrajudicial process, one that even this Supreme Court, in a 9-0 ruling, said violated due process requirements. That's hard to do these days, right? So what they're doing was violation of due process, and it wasn't about safety, and it wasn't about the law. It's also not about eliminating competition for American workers, because unemployment is low. And as you just pointed out, these jobs that people do are for very low wages. There's not a lot of competition for these jobs. Have you found any Trump administration reasons, stated reasons, for this mass deportation that hold up to scrutiny?
I mean, I'm not sure if I'm going to say this correctly, but I think Trump has been very clear that part of what he's trying to do is send a message, stop coming. And for that, he's been extremely effective. Like, I mean, it doesn't explain like each individual case on whether this man should have been removed from this country, but more broadly speaking, he's trying to send a message to other immigrants. One guy I talked to, his name's Leonardo Colmenares Solórzano. I had been in touch with his sister and his mom for months, and finally got to speak with him last week. He put it very clearly, like, who is going to want to come to this country when they can arrest you, they can send you to a prison and where they will kill you. And that was his language, where they will. He didn't die, but he felt like he might as well be dead. I think that's the that's the reason that they've stated that makes the most sense to me, like to make a point.
Okay. So except for Afrikaners, they're welcome.
Except for Afrikaners, which is a subject that I don't even want to talk about.
Okay. Well, look. Let me just change the subject a little. Your other reporting dives into that large part of the American economy where people work for low wages. I mean, so much of America's quality of life cruelly floats on the backs of low-wage workers. Those workers are more often than not invisible to other Americans. They work at night. It's hard to know where they are because that work is mobile, as you say, DoorDasheros. So I don't see evidence that the Trump administration, well, frankly, anybody, is working hard to figure out how to build an economy that isn't dependent on the misery of others. But simply deporting low-wage workers isn't really an answer. How will these deportations impact our economy?
I mean, I think that's a really interesting question, and I hope to spend more time kind of thinking about that this year because it's impossible. Like, I spent years writing about dairy farms in Wisconsin, and in Wisconsin, it's undocumented Mexican and Nicaraguan labor who's shoveling the manure and milking the cows, and we're not seeing raids. We're not seeing immigration enforcement in rural Wisconsin where those economies depend on that. I mean, we're starting to see. I mean, I talked to a couple of guys a few months ago who were picked up at a factory in Chicago, and I said, come in and taken like 2 of like the 200 undocumented workers. And it's like there was an opportunity to get more, but they did not. And I think it's kind of wait and see. There's like conflicting ideas within the Republican Party about what to do. I think there's a lot of Americans who are really upset about all these immigrants here taking their jobs. And I think there's some, like, I listen to people, and I can really empathize with some of what they're saying. But the people who run the companies that employ these folks, like, don't want their labor force to be touched. And you've even heard Trump. I mean, what was it, like a few weeks ago, where he kind of acknowledged, like, oh, the hotels and the farms, they have good workers there. Let's figure out a plan for them. So I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I have. Sometimes I think like Trump might actually have a really good opportunity to create a guest worker program that actually works and covers some of these sectors that aren't currently covered by the seasonal guest worker program. Like, so for year-round work, like hotels or like dairy farms. That hasn't happened yet. We haven't seen like real immigration reform since I was like a baby. I'm 41 now. I don't know.
There was a bill, Melissa, that did this. It was in Congress a couple of years ago when Joe Biden was president, and it was bipartisan. It was negotiated by Senator Langford, a very conservative Republican, and Donald Trump said, don't pass the bill. I want to run on immigration. Don't fix the problem because I want to run on it.
Right. No, and it helped him. He's very effective. I mean, will he do it now that he's in and big business does want a certain category of workers to stay here? I don't know. I think it's a really good question. I mean, I grew up in this. I'm the daughter of immigrants, and a lot of the people in my family worked construction, worked like setting pavement and in factory. My mom worked in a factory and in restaurants, and like it's hard. It's just hard for me to like understand a country that doesn't look this way, but I don't know. It's capitalism. Like, we'll see who wins if the anti-immigrant sector of the Republican Party or those who run the companies that rely on this labor.
Yeah, well, if the corporate Republicans take on this notion that America's supposed to be a white country only, I think they'll lose their battle in the Republican Party, which seems to have hitched its wagon to a very colorless world.
Yeah, and it's complicated. Like I'm not. I mean, I understand where a lot of people are coming from. I spent a couple of years writing about immigrants in Wisconsin on dairy farms, and I've spent a lot of time in rural Wisconsin talking to people. I think I think Democrats really failed to address the problem. And yes, Trump put all sorts of wrenches in it, but we also there's just so many problems with the immigration system.
It's broken.
It's so broken. And I mean,
so broken.
The vast majority of the immigrants I talked to in Wisconsin who had come as asylum seekers, would tell me very clearly they came for economic reasons. They didn't come because they were fleeing any sort of oppression. And I think we need to figure out some mechanism to bring in the labor that clearly is for the industries that clearly rely on it. And we haven't sorted that out. We don't have enough asylum.
And to use asylum and temporary protective status for the purposes for which they were created, not something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but then you have this system where people know they can come in. The immigration system is so backed up that they won't have a court hearing for 5 or 6 years, and in 5 or 6 years you can get a job, you can support your family, then you can have American-born children here, and it just makes it more and more and more complicated and difficult to untangle.
Yep, which is why it was important to pass that law they didn't pass. Yeah. Well, I hope Congress will do its job. And give us law. I don't have any patience for an extra legal process, one that follows no laws, whose apparent purpose, as you've been, I think, pretty clear about, the only one, is to be so cruel no one will ever want to come here.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't know exactly what I'm advocating for, but it's wild to me my parents come from Latin America, and I'm familiar with the history of authoritarian leaders in these countries, in Chile or Argentina, disappearing people, and it is stunning to me to witness this happen here. I didn't think this could happen, and here we are.
Yeah, Melissa, we got about 1 minute. I just want to ask you, how do you cope with covering the things that you cover, because all of them are not well known, very important to the American economy, and enormously painful?
I think I love what I do so much. I went into journalism and I cover these particular issues because they're really important to me personally, and I've always just thought that the stories of immigrants are not told in a way that's dignified. And so when I've been having these really brutal conversations with these guys who were tortured, and it kind of fills me with light because I know that it's super important. And so I think I'm okay. It's these people I'm writing about who aren't.
Thank you, Melissa. I really appreciate your work and that you shared it with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Edwin Eisendrath is taking your calls now at 773-763-9278. The Big Picture is on now. WCPT 820.
Okay, and that's me not knowing where my mute button is. I apologize. Paul, start us off.
Edwin, are you there? There we go. Can you hear me? Edwin. I'm not hearing Edwin.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Perfectly. All of you, I apologize for messing with my mute button.
Okay. All I can say is, so we're here now because Donald Trump said we're going to be saying Merry Christmas again. That is, the first thing is nobody ever stopped saying Merry Christmas, and the MAGA crowd are people that only want to say Merry Christmas. No, Happy Holiday, by the way, was written by the same Jewish songwriter who wrote White Christmas, Irving Berlin.
I don't care. If somebody wants to say Merry Christmas, have at it. I love that. They should say Merry Christmas.
Exactly.
Nobody's forcing him to say anything else.
And I say Merry Christmas, and I say Happy Hanukkah, and I sometimes say Happy Holiday if I don't know who I'm talking to. I don't know what their persuasion is.
Whatever. We should just honor people in the country. But, next election, we have our own set of things we can talk about. We could say, hey, you know what? We just don't want to ban books. There are plenty of things these guys have done that are, leaving the policies aside, that are socially unacceptable to vast majorities of Americans.
Yeah. Well, let me kind of review some of the conversations here. So the economy. One of your guests was talking about, okay, so the Biden economy numbers, and I've heard this too. I've had conservatives say, it might look good on paper, but that's not the regular, Joe Lunchbox experience. Okay, I can accept that. But don't tell me that his experience, Joe Lunchbox's experience, got better with negative economic numbers. He can't suddenly be experiencing the economy as being better for him unless it's all a psychological construct of power in that person's mind. He doesn't really know.
Wait, so just so I understand, Paul, you're saying like last election they got away with it, but in what's coming, since they're in charge and the economy is not better and inflation is back and every economist in the world is worried, you're thinking they're not gonna what? They're gonna most Americans are
what
gonna.
I'm saying is they're still saying. There was somebody barking at Tom Hartman last week saying that the tariffs are working and the economy is getting better. No, he can't possibly be experiencing that if his experience under the Biden economy was personally, no, the economy is not good for me, even though the numbers were good on paper, look good on the book. Well, you can't have numbers of job creation, inflation, all these things. Nothing's gotten better. Matter of fact, the Chicago Sun-Times is running an article about how grocery prices have actually gone up. Guest on Jones' show. Okay.
Yep.
So nobody can tell me that these things are working. They're not working. Unless these people are still telling us because all that's in their mind is the psychological construct of control. We have a leader who's trolling you, who's tweaking the lid, owning the lid. That's all they care about.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree with you about 26% of the voters right now. I don't disagree with you, Paul. Although I know it's hard to change your mind when you get in a mindset, and that's today. We have some time before the next election, and they're going to have time to change their minds, and we're going to help them change their minds and get everybody else to vote. Because these idiots in Washington, I'm talking about the Trump administration, they're going to screw over everybody, particularly their own voters. Oh, my gosh, rural hospitals, rural schools, rural health care everywhere. It's just a disaster. Farmers who can't be able to sell their crops. This is terrible stuff. And I'm not rooting for America to fail. I'm just looking at a guy who's trying to screw us.
Right. And so, in other words, it's got to be undeniably miserable for them to catch on. And we all have to go through this because they heard him say what they're thinking. We're going to be saying Merry Christmas again. Okay. So the next point is that your last guest was talking about how Trump is effective. He's making it so nobody wants to come here. But that's not the goal. That's like hiring a demolition pest control person who comes in with dynamite and blows your house up. Well, no bugs around here. Yeah, but I don't have a house. It's not that we don't want people to come here. We need people to come here. So nobody's coming here. And by the way, I'm going to say right now, don't fall for this, please, Los Angeles. I hope Governor Newsom and the both state and federal representatives from California get a hold of the IOC and say no Olympics in 2028 because we know what Trump is going to do. He's going to make a train wreck out of it for his own political purposes, if he's still alive, that is. Just tell them we've had an earthquake. We can't do it. He's going to deny the federal funding. I'm sorry, no, really. Well, we did. The earthquake in Russia caused so much damage, we just can't do it. That's a legitimate excuse. So that's legitimate in California to say we've had This is a legitimate excuse too, and the whole world knows the reason. They all know. Yeah,
that's a very
not
good
a good
point.
idea. Listen,
yeah, it's a
you
good
weren't
point.
here last week. Last week, okay, it was in. I read it on the online news. I guess it was originally appeared in USA Today. The State Department has denied visas to the Venezuelan senior Little League baseball.
I know.
Okay,
I know.
so if they're going to do that, they're going to cause havoc for Olympics. You can already see it coming. So no, don't even give them a chance to do that. And I guess last week, John, I didn't know that about John Roberts as the chairman of the board of the Smithsonian, which tells you that he has a conflict of interest when it comes to it. So the first thing to do when we have substantial majorities in regaining Congress is to impeach John Roberts. First him, and then deny Donald Trump an opportunity to reappoint a Chief Justice and then impeach Trump. So there is no Chief Justice to preside over his impeachment hearing, his impeachment trial. That's what you got to do.
Look,
I'm just playing hardball.
I'm all for hardball. Hey, and let's get, these ideas, all these ideas, and you have them and I have them. It's important to get them out there and let them percolate and let people hear them, and we will have a whole menu of stuff to pick from when we get our hands on the levers of power. And I am looking forward to that because we have a country to rebuild. Hey, thank you, Paul, as always.
You have to articulate the ideas and see how they fit after a few days, and most other people's ideas over, and then tweak them together, days and chain them together.
That's why these conversations matter. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, sure do.
All right, Jim, I'm turning to you.
Hi, Edwin. How lucky can we get? We have a generation of three miscreants who are the trinity of miscreants. You've got Netanyahu who has no regard for human life. I've been listening to Democracy Now!, and it's so excruciating. Being Irish and the Gaelic-speaking members of my family describing the Great Hunger in the middle of the 18th century, the 19th century. It's just too heartbreaking to even think about. No regard for human life. And then you have Putin, who has no regard for human life, only his own. And then you've got Trump with no regard for human life. And a good example was the pandemic. To Woodward, he articulated it perfectly. So this is a very dangerous disease. But he dummies up for a month. How many people incurred funeral expenses unnecessarily and suffering unnecessarily? He's president of the United States. Why wouldn't he trumpet that out at a news conference the first night if he knew that? But apparently he doesn't. He is too interested in his own avarice to do that. And then we go on to it's just the torture of putting people in prisons with no recourse. And you go on and on with it. I mean, they have no regard for human life. I don't know how people can attempt to lead or take the podium and have no regard for human life. I've never seen this in the history of humanity. Maybe
sure you have. Oh, yes, you have.
Well, of course I have. Look at the Irish. Look what happened to the Irish. That was a genocide, incredible genocide. There were millions of people that died. And you're going to die of starvation, Edwin. The Irish, what they would do was they would walk because it's so excruciating to sit down or lay down and wait to die. They would walk, and if they were lucky enough to walk and then die while they were walking, it stopped the pain.
This is not what we aspire to. This kind of leadership.
The Palestinians are better off with a bullet through their head. I mean, those are the lucky ones. The ones that aren't lucky are because a child, it takes a child about a month to die, before their innards swell up and die, and an adult probably 2 or 3 months. But they're excruciating deaths, Edwin. Excruciating. And to listen and watch this and listen to it is insane. And the Republicans are all for Netanyahu. I don't see him saying anything about Netanyahu or the $22 billion he gave Israel. What in the hell's going on here? And then this guy with a ballroom and a towel girl, a 16-year-old towel girl. Since when did I belonged to the Illinois Athletic Club and the Chicago Athletic Club? I didn't recall any 16-year-old kids handing out towels there. And if they were, I'm sure that the management had no idea who was handing the towels out. We used to swim naked there. Anyway, the point is, I mean, come on. I mean, what are we that daft in the noggin? I mean, it's just incredible. Anyway, I don't know. I mean, it's just impossible to listen to the news anymore. And what do they have on television? Food, weather, and some idiot, somebody from the thespian arts. In the meantime, the country's burning down around us. Anyway, Edwin, have a good week. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
I appreciate that. I just respond to a couple of things. I'm glad there still are and thespians out there. Boy, do we need it. And I know,
but we don't need political advice from them. That's for certain.
No, that's
that
absolutely
we don't
right.
need. That we don't need.
That's absolutely.
Okay, thanks, Edwin.
You bet. And look, in the Middle East, where there's blame everywhere to go around, what we are missing, we're missing it, and this horror show is happening because no one is responsible for trying to make peace. It is unconscionable. The starvation is unconscionable. The killing is too much. It's too much. It was too much on October 7th. It is too much today. Somebody has to want to make peace. They have to want to make peace. And God knows we're not seeing it from leadership there. And we're not trying to push for it in our leadership here. Not there, not Ukraine, not anywhere. And he wants a Nobel Peace Prize. Go figure. Eduardo.
Yeah, good afternoon, Edward. Oh, I can hear you now, but better than yesterday when I called Patty. I got a comment on this two submarines. What are we doing here? Because this could be almost like a taco moment. If you're really going to do something, you got to hit somewhere in Moscow, somewhere in St. Petersburg, because this guy is not scared of anybody. I don't know what we're doing. Two submarines, that seems kind of weak if we're just sending two submarines and you're not firing over there.
Well, wait. First, these are nuclear submarines. They can do all kinds of devastating damage, some of the most sophisticated and terrifying weapons of war in the world. They can hit any place. And by the way, they
not
also...
Nukes, yeah, that's right. Yeah, not nukes, but I mean regular weapons, right. You're right about that.
These are nuclear... And by the way, these submarines regularly patrol the waters all over the world. So he's saying he's repositioning them. He's repositioning the places that they already go. He's talking about it now out loud, not because he wants to deter Putin. No. There are lots of ways he could do that. There have always been lots of ways he could do that. He's not interested in that. He's interested in changing the subject. He's interested in us being scared about nuclear war, and believe me, I'm terrified about it. I was terrified about it in his first 6 months when he was threatening to nuke North Korea. But we learned with the North Korea episode that he didn't care. North Korea got their own nuke. They tested their own ballistic missiles. It was just to change the subject because he was in trouble. And that's what's happening again. He will do anything in order to avoid being the subject of trouble. And he's in trouble because his tariffs aren't working. The economy is not doing well. He's, these terrorists he's put on our streets ostensibly to collect Trindagua gang members, but that's not what they're doing. This is not going well for him. So instead, he's telling us the position of two of our nuclear subs. He's telling the whole world about that, which he, of course, should not do.
No, I mean, that kind of stuff, you kind of keep silent, although somebody who likes to talk a lot, obviously can't keep their mouth shut. So there you go.
Yeah.
Okay, Edwin, thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for calling. Yeah. Well, there's so many stories this week, and I wanted to talk to you about so many of them, and I just couldn't get to all of them because the news it comes barreling out of these guys, one bad thing after the next. I mean, how do you keep up, right? I mean, he's complaining that the Russia hoax was a hoax. He's made up this notion that somehow Hillary Clinton planted evidence to blame him for the Russian hoax. That, of course, was is a lie that even his own appointed special prosecutor knew it was a lie. So there's nothing new there. He's saying it. He's moving. I can't pronounce her name. Ghislaine Maxwell, woman convicted of this terrible crime with Jeffrey Epstein of trafficking these young women. He's moved her out of the prison she was in to a prison that's not allowed to hold sex offenders. So I guess he's ordered that she's no longer a sex offender. He would pardon her. That's just despicable on every possible level, right? I mean, the news this week, it just takes your breath away, right? And one lie after another, all aiming, I don't know what, to keep his base from finding out the truth, to keep the rest of us off balance, lying about the job numbers, firing an accountant, the pay-to-play operation. I mean, the Republican, his war chest is enormous now because of rich people and corporate America who bent the knee and kissed his backside and said, we're happy with a king as long as he's our king. Seriously? Now they're going after Jack Smith, right, who did everything right. But I don't know. This is, the senators, now the United States Senate, a Republican senator wants an inquiry over the prosecution of Donald Trump. Well, they should have that inquiry, and we should really talk about, what that job didn't finish. Oh, my gosh. This is the world we're in, fellas. We have to fight hard, fight every day. For gosh sakes, take the indivisible training and how you can stand up, and it's called strategic, nonviolent, non-cooperation. Big mouthful, but it really means how you can help shore up all our institutions in the meantime, and how we can push members of Congress who really don't care, but maybe we can make them care, so that they can be reminded of their day job, which had something to do with an oath they once swore. One of my guests early, I think the first guest, Sam Bagnasos, quoted that part of our Constitution that says the president shall take care. I want to get the exact words. I have a Constitution in front of me, and I actually know where this is. It's in Article 2. Article 2, the president shall... I can't find it right now, and I don't want to make you listen, but he's supposed to take care that the laws of the United States are faithfully executed. And honestly, I think Donald Trump read that differently. He just thought he should execute, like guillotine, the laws of the United States, that they should be killed. That's how he's reading faithfully execute, because it's the most lawless presidency of our lifetime, abetted by a Supreme Court that is, I don't know, enthralled by the idea of presidential power and their own diktat. Dark times, my friends, but we will get through them. And the timeline that we get through them depends on how determined we are. So let's be determined. Let's welcome everyone into our tent, even if we disagree with them about things. Welcome them all in and keep our focus on getting these insurrectionists, these people who would destroy our democracy, out of our government. All right, folks, thank you for joining me for another week, and I look forward to seeing you again, talking with you again next week. You take care.